September 18, 1872, Red Hollow, Colorado. A woman stood before an iron cage in the town square. Inside, a man condemned to hang for murder. She held up a gold wedding ring. "I will marry this man," she announced. The crowd erupted in laughter. "You won't last a week," they jeered. But what happened next changed everything. Let me start at the beginning. December 1918. Snow fell thick outside the cabin in Stone Valley, Colorado. The fire crackled in the hearth, casting dancing shadows across rough-hewn walls that had stood for 46 years. Benjamin Stone sat in his chair by the fire. 81 years old now, white hair falling past his collar, hands gnarled from 5 decades of working iron. Those hands rested on the armrests, scarred and calloused, telling stories of their own. Beside him sat Eleanor, 74, silver-haired, but eyes still bright as mountain springs. Her hand rested on his fingers, intertwined the way they'd been for nearly half a century. Across from them, 3 faces watched in the firelight. Samuel Stone, Jr., 43 years old, sat forward with his elbows on his knees. His daughter Grace, 16, perched on the edge of her seat. Young Michael, 12, cross-legged on the floor, chin resting on his fists. Grace broke the silence. "Grandpa, how did you and Grandma meet?" Benjamin didn't answer right away. He stared into the flames like a man reading words written in fire. Eleanor squeezed his hand. Her nod was almost imperceptible. "You want the truth, child?" His voice came rough as creek stones. "Or the pretty story folks usually tell? The truth, Grandpa." Benjamin looked at her for a long moment. Firelight caught the silver in his eyes. "All right, but you need to understand something. This isn't a love story, not the kind where lightning strikes and hearts flutter. This is a story about a man in an iron cage, a desperate woman, and the strangest marriage proposal that ever happened in Colorado territory." He paused. The fire popped. Snow whispered against the windows. "Started September 18, 1872. I was 35. Your grandmother was 28. Another pause. Longer this time. "And I was locked in an iron cage in the middle of Red Hollow waiting to hang." Grace's eyes went wide. Michael sat up straighter. Samuel Jr. leaned back, a knowing look on his face. He'd heard pieces of this before. Benjamin's gaze drifted to the window, to the valley beyond where snow blanketed everything in white silence. Let me start at the beginning. The firelight seemed to dim. The cabin walls faded, and in the way stories have of pulling listeners backward through time, they were there. September 15, 1872. Red Hollow, Colorado territory. 10:03 in the morning. The stagecoach lurched to a stop in a cloud of red dust, temperature hovering near 87 degrees, the kind of heat that made the air shimmer and dance. Eleanor Hartwell stepped down onto hard-packed earth, one carpetbag in her hand, $23 in her pocket. Everything she owned in the world. 6 letters rested in her bag, letters from Thomas Finch, letters promising land, a house, a future. Letters she'd read until the creases had worn thin. Thomas Finch wasn't there. Red Hollow spread before her like a wound in the earth. Buildings slouched against each other. Dust coated everything. The smell of iron and old fear hung in the air like smoke. Eleanor walked to the boarding house. The woman who answered the door looked her up and down with eyes that had seen too many women like her. "Thomas Finch." The woman's laugh was sharp enough to cut. "He left 4 months ago. Took money from 3 other women before you." The world tilted. Eleanor's hand found the doorframe. This was the second time. The second time she'd trusted the wrong man. Daniel had died for land in Ohio, shot in the back while Eleanor watched. Respectable men pulled the triggers. The law shrugged. She'd sold everything left, everything followed letters west to start over. And now there was nothing. "You want a room?" The landlady's voice had softened slightly. $2 a night. Eleanor did the math in her head. $23, 11 nights. Then what? Is there work? For a single woman here. Another laugh. "There's one kind of work, but you don't want that." Eleanor's jaw tightened. What else is there? The landlady studied her. Nothing respectable. Town's 10 men to every woman, most of them rough. Sheriff Dawson keeps order mostly, but he answers to the ranchers, the ones with money. She paused. There's a man in a cage in the town square. Some call him a monster. Maybe he's hiring. The words were meant as mockery. Eleanor heard something else. A man in a cage. Killed Luke Brenner, or so they say. Been there 3 weeks, hanging scheduled for Friday. Eleanor should have walked away, should have used her $23 to buy passage somewhere else, anywhere else. Instead, she walked toward the town square. The cage stood 8 feet tall, 6 feet wide, iron bars 2 inches thick. It sat in the center of the square where everyone could see it, where everyone did see it. The man inside didn't look like a monster. He looked like silence. The kind that comes after storms tear everything away and leave only wreckage behind. Dark hair fell past his shoulders, tangled and matted with dust. Broad shoulders curved inward. Shackles circled his wrists, the metal worn into the skin. Blood had dried there days old. His feet were bare, caked with dirt. His clothes hung in tatters, but Eleanor could see they'd once been well made. The stitching spoke of craftsmanship. His head stayed bowed. He didn't look at the people who gathered to stare, didn't look at anything. A small crowd had formed. Eleanor listened to their whispers. That's the one killed Luke Brenner. Lived up in the mountains like an animal. Took 6 men to drag him down here. Stopped talking years ago, after his wife and children died. A woman stepped close to Eleanor. Don't get near the bars. He nearly bit a man's finger off. Eleanor ignored her. She walked forward until she stood inches from the cage. For the first time, the man lifted his head. Gray eyes met hers. Not wild, not angry, just tired. So profoundly tired that Eleanor felt it in her own bones. She'd seen eyes like that before, in her mirror, after Daniel died. These were the eyes of someone who had nothing left to lose. How long has he been in there? Eleanor asked the crowd. 3 weeks. What's his crime? The answers came in fragments. Killed Luke Brenner. Found standing over the body, blood on his hands, living like a beast in the mountains. Cursed. Dangerous. Was there a trial? Silence. Then someone muttered, "Don't need one. Evidence is clear." What evidence? A man pushed through the crowd. Sheriff Cole Dawson, mid-40s, hard-faced, with eyes that didn't quite meet hers. "You've had your look, ma'am. Move along." I asked what evidence. Blood on his hands, standing over the body. Witnesses? No. But then how do you know what happened? Dawson's face flushed. Who are you to be asking questions? Eleanor Hartwell, from Ohio, and I believe in the law, real law, not this. She turned and walked away. Behind her, she felt the man's eyes following. She didn't look back. That same afternoon, in a private office above the Red Hollow General Store, Marcus Brenner sat alone, 42 years old, owner of the largest ranch in 3 counties. A photograph of his brother Luke sat on the desk. Marcus stared at it while he poured whiskey into a glass. 3 weeks since Luke died. 3 weeks since they'd found that mountain man standing over the body. And still something gnawed at Marcus, something that wouldn't let him rest. A knock at the door. Deputy Wilson entered. The woman who came in on the stage today. She was asking questions about the prisoner. What kind of questions? Evidence, witnesses, legal things. Marcus set down his glass. Name? Eleanor Hartwell, from Ohio. Watch her. Report everything she does. Yes, sir. After Wilson left, Marcus stood and walked to the window. He could see the town square from here, see the cage, see the figure inside. Luke, I swear you'll have justice. I swear it. But doubt crept in like cold through cracks in walls. Luke had died alone in the mountains. No witnesses. Just a body and a blood-covered man who wouldn't speak. And something about that man didn't fit, didn't match the story of a killer. Marcus shook his head. No, don't doubt. Luke was family. He sat at his desk and pulled out paper, wrote an address in Denver, hired the best investigator money could buy, because if there was truth to be found, Marcus Brenner would find it, even if that truth wasn't what he wanted to hear. Eleanor didn't sleep that night in the boarding house room. The bed was hard, the walls were thin. $23 felt lighter in her pocket with each passing hour. But it wasn't money that kept her awake. She kept seeing those gray eyes, that exhausted resignation. A man waiting to die. Her thoughts drifted to Ohio. 8 months ago. Daniel lying in the dirt, 3 bullet holes in his back. Respectable men standing with smoking guns, the sheriff calling it self-defense, even though Daniel had no weapon. They'd wanted the land. Daniel had refused to sell, so they took it the easy way, and the law did nothing. Eleanor sat up in bed, opened her carpet bag, pulled out the one thing of value she still owned, a gold wedding ring, Daniel's ring. She turned it in the lamplight. The gold caught and threw back tiny sparks. If I sell this, I can survive 2 more months, maybe 3. Then what? The thought that came next was madness. She knew it was madness even as it formed, but there was a Colorado law, a strange law born of frontier desperation. A woman could propose marriage to a condemned prisoner. If he accepted, if they married, the execution could be delayed for review. Not a pardon, not freedom, just time, and sometimes time was everything. Eleanor looked at herself in the small mirror on the wall. Eleanor Hartwell, are you really going to propose to a stranger in an iron cage, a man accused of murder? Her reflection didn't answer. Your first husband died because you trusted the wrong person. Now you'll marry a man you know nothing about. Still silence. This is insane. But she held on to the ring. The next day, Eleanor watched from a distance. 6 in the morning. They brought him water. He drank carefully, not a drop wasted. 8 o'clock. Bread. He ate slowly, savoring, making it last. 10 o'clock. A child threw a rock. It struck the man's shoulder. He didn't react, just covered his head with his arms. Noon. The sun beat down merciless. He pressed himself into the corner with the most shade. 3 in the afternoon. Sheriff Dawson checked the shackles. The man held out his hands docile, cooperative. Dawson wouldn't meet his eyes. 6 o'clock. More water. The man nodded thanks. Dawson turned away quickly. Eleanor watched it all. This wasn't the behavior of a monster. This was the behavior of a man who'd given up, who'd accepted what was coming. And Sheriff Dawson wouldn't look at him. Guilty conscience, Eleanor thought. A man who knows he's done wrong but won't admit it. As the sun set, Eleanor approached the cage again. This time she carried a canteen of water. Are you thirsty? The man looked up. Surprise flickered across his face. He nodded. Eleanor passed the canteen through the bars. His hands shook as he took it. Shackles rattled. He drank. Thank you. The words came out as a whisper. Rough, barely audible. Eleanor's breath caught. You can speak. Silence. You're not mute. A shake of his head. Then why don't you speak? Why don't you defend yourself? Those gray eyes met hers again. Something moved behind them. Ancient pain. Words don't matter anymore. He turned away. Eleanor stood there as darkness gathered. When she finally left, her decision was made. September 18th, 1872. 2 o'clock in the afternoon. Eleanor had spent the morning with Judge William Turner, retired but still respected, still holding authority. I want to propose marriage to the prisoner. Turner studied her over his glasses. You know what he's accused of? I know he's accused, not convicted. Do you love him? No? Then why? Eleanor met his eyes without flinching. Because once in my life I want to do what's right. Not what's easy, not what's safe. What's right. Turner was silent for a long moment. I'll witness it. But you have to be certain. I am. At 2 o'clock, the town square filled with people. Word had spread. The woman from Ohio. The stranger. She'd told people what she planned to do. Most came to laugh. Eleanor stood before the cage. In her hand, the gold ring caught the afternoon sun. Sheriff Dawson stood nearby, arms crossed. Marcus Brenner watched from the saloon doorway, face unreadable. Eleanor's voice rang clear across the square. "I want to make a proposal." The crowd quieted. "I will marry this man." Laughter exploded. Jeers, catcalls. "You're insane. He'll kill you before morning. You won't last a week." Eleanor didn't move, didn't flinch. "I am of sound mind. I know what I'm offering." She turned to face the man in the cage. He was looking at her now, really looking. "I don't know your story, but I know loneliness. I know what it's like to be judged without being heard." She held up the ring. "This is all I have. It's not much, but I give it freely." The crowd fell silent, waiting. The man stared at the ring, then at her face. Something shifted in his expression. A crack in the wall of resignation. Slowly he nodded. One small movement, certain. Eleanor turned to Sheriff Dawson. "He's agreed." "I can't just—" "Yes, you can. You've held him without trial. I'm taking him from this town as my lawful husband. Or you can explain to the circuit judge why you denied a woman her legal right to marry." Dawson's face went crimson. Judge Turner stepped forward from the crowd. "I've heard enough, Sheriff. Open the cage." "You can't be serious." "I am. The law allows this." Before Dawson could respond, another voice cut through the square. "Wait." Marcus Brenner walked forward. The crowd parted for him. He stopped in front of Eleanor. "You know he's accused of killing my brother?" "I know he's accused, not proven guilty." "You're betting your life." "Yes." Marcus studied her. Then he looked at the man in the cage. Something unreadable crossed his face. Doubt, conflict. "Then good luck to you. You'll need it." He turned and walked away. Didn't try to stop it. Keys rattled in the lock. The cage door swung open with a sound like a gunshot. The man stepped out, bare feet on dust, chains still circling his wrists. He moved carefully, like someone who'd learned not to frighten others. Eleanor stood beside him, barely came to his shoulder. Judge Turner's voice carried across the square. "Eleanor Hartwell, do you take this man as your lawful husband?" "I do." "And you, son, do you consent?" The man raised his shackled hands, pressed his palms together once, a prayer gesture. Turner nodded. "That's consent enough. By the authority of Colorado Territory, I pronounce you husband and wife." Eleanor slid the ring onto the man's smallest finger. It barely fit. His hands trembled at her touch, the first gentle touch in months. Sheriff Dawson thrust a paper at Eleanor. "Marriage certificate, legal." His voice dropped to a whisper only she could hear. "God forgive me if I'm wrong about him." He stepped back, raised his voice. "Get out of my sight, both of you. Don't come back to Red Hollow." The crowd reacted. Some jeered. A woman spat. "Won't live past the first mile." But an old man near the back tipped his hat. "Good luck, Mrs. Stone." Eleanor blinked. Mrs. Stone. She didn't even know the man's name until Judge Turner had asked. Marcus Brenner watched from the saloon doorway. Deputy Wilson appeared at his elbow. "Should we follow them?" "No." "But, sir, I hired an investigator. She arrives next week from Denver." "She?" "Catherine Wolfe, best in the West. If there's truth to find about Luke's death, she'll find it." Wilson left. Marcus poured another whiskey, drank it in one swallow. "Luke, if you were truly murdered, I'll see justice done. I swear it. But if something else happened, if the truth is different than what I believe—" He couldn't finish the thought. They walked, the man and the woman who'd just married, strangers bound by law and desperation. For the first hour, Eleanor didn't look back. When she finally did, Red Hollow had disappeared behind dust and distance. The man walked 6 feet behind her, keeping distance. The chains clinked with every step. A constant reminder. Eleanor's mind churned. What have I done? Married a stranger, a man accused of murder, a man I know nothing about. Guilt surfaced. Did I save him or buy him? Is this mercy or selfishness? A way to escape my own loneliness. But he nodded. He agreed. That matters. The man's thoughts ran darker. Why did she do this? No one does anything without wanting something. What does she want? Protection money. I have nothing. Don't hope. Hope only leads to pain. The sun climbed toward afternoon. The trail wound upward into scattered pines. Eleanor stumbled. Her boots were worn thin. The man gestured. Stop. Rest. She obeyed, surprised he'd given an order. He examined her boots, frowned, pointed ahead down the trail. Eleanor tried for lightness. You could run now, you know. Chains or not. You could disappear into those mountains. He looked at her. The ghost of a smile touched his mouth. And go where? Anywhere. You'd be free. He shook his head. Free and alone isn't freedom. Eleanor had no answer for that. They made camp as darkness fell, found a cluster of juniper trees. The man gathered branches with practiced efficiency, built a fire by striking stones together. Sparks caught, flames bloomed. Eleanor watched, understanding dawning. He's done this 1,000 times. This is survival, not violence. They shared what little food Eleanor had. Hard bread, dried beef, half a canteen of water. The man took tiny portions. Eleanor pushed more toward him. Eat. You need strength. He hesitated, then obeyed. He disappeared into the brush. Eleanor's heart jumped with fear, but he returned minutes later carrying prickly pear fruit carefully cleaned, wild onions, sage leaves. Thank you. A nod. Eleanor pulled out her sewing kit. Your clothes are falling apart. Let me mend them. He turned his side toward her. She worked carefully, aware of his tension. Beneath the torn fabric, old scars, deep jagged marks across his ribs, burns on his shoulder, a badly healed knife wound. You've survived a lot. His shoulders shifted. Agreement. Eleanor kept talking. It was easier in the firelight. My first husband was killed over land, shot from behind. The law did nothing. Her voice stayed steady. I sold everything after that. Answered a letter promising a new start. A bitter smile. Instead, I found you in a cage. He listened, the first person to really listen in years. When Eleanor's stitching was done, he took her carpet bag. The handle was tearing loose. With his teeth and his bound hands, he reworked the leather. His stitching was stronger than before. Fair trade, Eleanor said. He made a gesture, palm up, palm down, balance. The cold deepened. Eleanor unfolded her single blanket. We'll share. He shook his head, started to curl up near the fire. That's foolish. We're married now, strange as that is. He moved to the edge of the blanket, back to her, taking minimal space. She pulled the blanket over both of them. His chains rattled as he shifted. Without thinking, Eleanor touched his shoulder. He flinched violently. I'm sorry, I didn't mean to startle you. He lay still, breathing carefully. Then slowly he relaxed beneath her hand. Eleanor whispered into the darkness, Tomorrow we'll remove those shackles. A soft exhale answered her. I'll call you Ben, short for Benjamin, unless you tell me otherwise. The moment hung between them. Then he shifted slightly, pressed his palms together once more. Agreement. Thanks. I don't expect anything from this marriage. If you want to leave when you're free, I won't stop you. Long silence. Then his hand slowly reached back. His fingers brushed hers. Briefly. A promise. Stars wheeled overhead. A coyote howled. The sound felt honest in the darkness. They were strangers, bound by desperation and the thinnest thread of hope. But in that darkness, something fragile began. Not love. Not yet. Just the first breath of possibility. Eleanor drifted toward sleep. The fire burned low. Ben's breathing evened out beside her. Then his body went rigid. Eleanor's eyes opened. What is it? Shh. She heard it then. Hoofbeats. Distant but approaching. Someone's coming. They scrambled into the brush, left the fire burning. Ben moved silent despite the chains. Eleanor grabbed her bag. 2 riders appeared, torches held high. Eleanor recognized one, Deputy Wilson from Red Hollow. The men stopped at the abandoned camp. Their voices carried. "Boss said give them a head start." "Why just shoot them now? Make it look like an accident." "No. Marcus wants that investigator woman to do her job first. If the mountain man's guilty, let the law handle it proper. If not—" "If not what?" A pause, heavy with meaning. "Then we got a problem. Luke wasn't clean, Tom. You know that." "Don't say that. Marcus will have your head." "Marcus hired the investigator because he's not sure. Think about it. Would he waste money otherwise?" The riders moved on, disappeared into darkness. Eleanor and Ben emerged from hiding. "They're not chasing us." Eleanor was confused. Ben's voice came quiet. "Worse. They're watching, waiting." "For what? For me to prove I'm a killer? Or prove I'm not?" Eleanor looked at him in the moonlight. "Which one are you?" He met her eyes. "I don't know anymore." They moved their camp, found another spot, rebuilt the fire, but neither slept well. Morning came pale and cold. Ben was already awake when Eleanor opened her eyes. He'd been working on the shackles, grinding them against stones. Blood marked his wrists where the metal had cut deeper. "Let me help." He shook his head. "At least let me bandage the wounds." He paused, extended his hands. Eleanor cleaned the cuts with water and torn cloth. Up close, she could see his hands clearly. The hands of a craftsman, calluses layered on calluses, burn scars from years of work. The tip of his left pinky was missing. "You were a smith." A nod. "A good one, I'd guess." The faintest flicker of pride in his eyes. "What made you stop?" Long silence. Then just one word. "Fire. A fire. House fire. Lost everything." He didn't elaborate. Returned to grinding the shackles. By full sunrise, one shackle snapped open. Then the other. He stared at his freed wrists. Turned his hands over and back, like he didn't quite believe it. Then something broke loose inside him. Ben grabbed the chains, lifted them high, brought them crashing down against a rock. Again. 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 The metal bent, twisted. Each strike released years of helpless rage, years of being trapped, years of having no control. He swung until his arms shook, until the chains were mangled beyond recognition. Then he hurled them into the ravine. The echo faded like a scream swallowed by distance. He stood breathing hard, hands bleeding again, but calmer, centered. He turned back. Eleanor hadn't moved, hadn't flinched, hadn't judged. "Better?" she asked quietly. He nodded. He knelt at the creek, washed his hands, watched the blood swirl away in the current. His lips moved. Eleanor barely heard the whisper. "Mary hated seeing blood, used to cry." Mary, a daughter's name. Eleanor's heart broke a little, but she didn't press. Some stories had to be offered, not demanded. They packed up camp, started walking again. "How far from Red Hollow?" Eleanor asked. Ben thought. 15 miles, maybe. "Next town." "Cedar Falls, 40 miles north." "How long to get there?" "On foot 3 days." "Do we have 3 days?" He looked at her seriously. "Depends. Marcus's men are watching. Investigators coming. If she's good, we might have less." In the distance, a single gunshot cracked the morning air. "Hunters?" Eleanor asked. Ben shook his head. "Signal. They found our old camp." Meaning they know which way we're headed." They kept walking. The trail climbed into real pines now. Eleanor stumbled more often. Her boots were falling apart. Ben disappeared into the trees, came back with strips of soft bark. He knelt and wrapped her feet before she put her boots back on. The pain eased. "Thank you." He inclined his head. They walked in silence for another hour. Then Ben spoke. "You're brave. Or foolish." Eleanor glanced at him surprised. "Which?" "Don't know yet." A small smile touched both their faces. The trail rounded a bend. The valley opened below them. Eleanor stopped, stared. Creek water running silver. Bottomland rich with grass, shelter from the wind behind a ridge, but no house, no cabin, nothing but wilderness. "He never built it," Eleanor whispered. "Thomas Finch lied about everything." Then she saw it, half hidden near the creek, a dugout shelter, abandoned, unfinished. They climbed down, went inside. Dirt floor, half-framed roof, stones waiting for purpose, tool marks on the beams recent but weathered. Eleanor found something carved into a support beam. TF plus AM plus SW, 1872. 3 sets of initials. "Not one woman," Eleanor said slowly. "Not 2, 3. I was the 4th. Ann Miller, dead of tuberculosis on the journey west. Susan Walsh, disappeared after discovering the fraud. And Eleanor, the latest victim of Thomas Finch's lies." Ben studied the structure carefully, tested the supports, the roof beams. He ran his hands over the wood with a craftsman's eye. He made a building gesture. Eleanor looked at him. "With what I have, $23 and no tools." He wiggled his fingers, gestured to the land around them, skills and materials. "You'd help me build this?" A firm nod. Eleanor's throat tightened. "All right, we'll try." For a moment something almost like hope crossed Ben's face, a rare smile. Then it faded. He stared at the shelter. His hands started trembling. He drew a line across his throat with his finger, pointed to himself, covered his face with both hands. Eleanor understood. "You built before, and it ended in death." The barest nod. His jaw clenched. "Your family." Another nod, so slight she almost missed it. Ben picked up a stick, drew in the dirt. A rectangle, a house. 3 small circles inside. A family. Then he added a 4th circle outside, separate, alone. He slashed through all 4, covered the drawing with his palm, erased it. Eleanor stepped closer. "It doesn't have to end the same way." He looked at her for a long moment, fear warred with something else in his eyes, something that might have been hope trying to survive. Finally, he picked up the stick again. Drew new plans, simple, strong, lines that spoke of shelter and safety, hope sketched in dirt and dreams. The sun sank lower. The weight of what lay ahead settled on both their shoulders. They'd found a place. Not the place Eleanor had been promised, but a place nonetheless. Whether they could make it into a home remained to be seen. That night they camped in the half-finished dugout. The dirt floor held the day's cold. Wind slipped through gaps in the unfinished roof. The fire Ben built burned small but steady. Eleanor spread pine needles where they'd sleep, laid the blanket over them. The shelter smelled of earth and old wood and possibility. Ben sat near the entrance, eyes on the darkness outside. "You don't have to keep watch," Eleanor said gently. "No one followed us here." He didn't answer. Some dangers didn't follow. Some dangers waited. They ate in silence. The last of Eleanor's supplies. Tomorrow they'd need to hunt, to gather, to truly begin living off the land. Eleanor lay back, stared through the open roof at stars wheeling overhead. "Tomorrow we start on the roof beams," she said. "If we're careful, we can make it hold." Ben shifted, picked up his stick, drew in the dirt again, frame angles, support points, where stone should go, where wood would last longest. "You were more than a smith," Eleanor observed. He added decorative touches to his drawing, curves meant for beauty, not just function. "You were an artist." Ben stared at the drawing for a long moment. Then he erased it with his palm. The gesture spoke of shame, or grief, or both. Silence settled, not uncomfortable, just present. Then Eleanor began to hum. An old tune, unconscious habit. Ben's head turned. He'd heard music in years. The sound seemed to surprise him. Eleanor stopped embarrassed. He gestured. "Continue." So she hummed again, quieter. The melody drifted up through the open roof to join the stars. Ben's shoulders lowered. Tension eased from his frame like water finding level. By the time Eleanor's humming faded into sleep, they both rested easier than they had in months. Morning brought frost and pale sunlight. They began work. Ben showed Eleanor how to brace beams with stone, how to test wood for weakness by tapping and listening, how to read the land, water flow, wind patterns, the language of earth and sky. Eleanor learned quickly. Her hands blistered, but she didn't complain. By midday, the shelter felt stronger, more permanent, small victories. Then Ben froze mid-step. He was staring at the creek, at an old cottonwood tree growing there. Eleanor followed his gaze, saw rope marks carved deep into the bark, weathered, faded by years of sun and rain. Someone had been hanged from that tree. Ben staggered backward like he'd been struck. His careful calm shattered completely. He covered his face. His breathing came fast and shallow, a panic attack rising like flood water. He dropped to his knees. With shaking hands he gathered stones from the creek bed. One large stone, two smaller ones. He placed them carefully in the dirt. A family. Then more stones. Many stones. Surrounding the family. Protection community. He made violent stabbing motions with his stick. Raiders. Attackers. He scattered the small stones, covered them with dirt. Burial. His shoulders shook with silent sobs. Eleanor knelt beside him. Let him finish his story in stones and dirt and grief too large for words. He drew the house again, made a building motion, then drew a noose hanging from a tree branch, pointed to himself. "After you lost them," Eleanor said slowly, piecing it together, "you tried to build again, and they tried to hang you for it." A hard nod, tears streaming down his face. "Because your grief scared them." "Yes." Eleanor felt her own tears fall. "You survived more than anyone should have to. That doesn't make you cursed." Ben pressed his palms into the dirt, sat there for a long time. Then he stood slowly, turned back toward the shelter, picked up his tools, hands steadier now. "Past is past," his gesture seemed to say. They worked until dusk, not fast, not perfect, but together. That night the fire burned brighter. Ben no longer sat at the entrance keeping watch. He settled closer to the fire. The blanket brushed Eleanor's arm. Progress came in inches. A week passed, then another. The shelter grew stronger. The roof held, walls filled in. The space began to feel like it could be a home. One afternoon a traveling peddler came through the valley, old man with a broken wagon wheel. Ben approached without hesitation, examined the wheel, gestured for tools, worked in silence for 90 minutes. When he finished, the wheel was stronger than before. The peddler tried to pay. Ben shook his head. "Wouldn't take money." "Then I must repay you somehow." The peddler pointed to an old mule tied to his wagon. "She's stubborn as sin, half lame, but she'll haul." Ben looked to Eleanor. Her decision. "We'd be grateful," Eleanor said. As the peddler prepared to leave, he grew serious. "You're the ones from Red Hollow, the woman who married the man in the cage." Not a question. Eleanor nodded. The peddler studied Ben. "You don't look like a killer to me." He paused. "But there's men who still think otherwise. Marcus Brenner's been asking questions, hired someone to investigate his brother's death." Eleanor's stomach dropped. "Just thought you should know." The peddler tipped his hat, left them with the mule and the warning. Eleanor turned to Ben. "We'll need supplies soon, real supplies. That means town." Ben's jaw tightened, fear visible in every line of his body. "We'll go together," Eleanor said. "We won't stay long." He nodded, though dread was written clear across his face. They had no choice. Winter was coming, and they couldn't survive alone. Behind them the valley stretched quiet and beautiful in the fading light. Their home, such as it was. Ahead lay Cedar Falls. People, questions, judgment. And somewhere an investigator was coming. Someone who would dig into the truth of Luke Brenner's death. Whether that truth would save them or destroy them, neither could say. In the cabin in Stone Valley, 46 years later, Benjamin paused in his telling. The fire had burned low. Grace and Michael sat spellbound. Samuel Jr. leaned forward, though he'd heard parts of this before. "Grandpa," Grace whispered. "What happened next?" Benjamin looked at Eleanor. She smiled. "That," he said, "is a story for another night. Your grandmother and I were old, need our rest." "But, Grandpa—" "Tomorrow," Eleanor said gently. "Tomorrow we'll tell you about Cedar Falls, about Marcus Brenner and the investigator, about the trial." She paused. "About the day your grandfather found his voice again." The children reluctantly stood, hugged their grandparents, filed out into the snowy night. When they were gone, Benjamin and Eleanor sat in silence. "You told it well," she said. "Lived it better." They held hands in the firelight. Two people who'd started as strangers in desperate circumstances, who'd built a life from nothing but determination and faith. Outside, snow continued to fall on the valley they'd claimed, the valley that had witnessed everything: loss and healing, silence and voice, despair and hope. The story wasn't finished, not yet. But for tonight, this was enough. The hoofbeats grew louder. Ben stood motionless beside the dying fire, every muscle tense. His hands, finally free of chains, curled into fists. But fists meant nothing against rifles. "Eleanor." His voice was barely a whisper. "Into the trees. Now." She was already reaching for her carpet bag. "Leave it. This is everything Your life is worth more than a bag." He turned to face her in the darkness. "Move." Something in his tone cut through her protest. She dropped the bag and followed him into the juniper scrub brambles catching at her skirt. Behind them, the fire crackled innocently, as if nothing were amiss. Two riders emerged from the darkness, torches held high. Orange light danced across their faces. Eleanor recognized one immediately, Deputy Wilson from Red Hollow. The other was younger, nervous hand resting on his gun. They dismounted 50 feet from the camp. Wilson kicked at Eleanor's abandoned carpet bag. "Fresh fire. Can't be far." The younger man, Tom, scanned the darkness. "Maybe they heard us coming." "Maybe." Wilson crouched, touching the ground near the fire. "Or maybe they're smarter than the boss thinks." He stood brushing dirt from his hands. "You know what Marcus said, give them a head start." Tom's hand tightened on his gun. "Why just shoot them now? Make it look like an accident. Say they tried to rob us." Eleanor felt Ben's hand on her shoulder, pressing her lower into the brush. His breathing was controlled, measured, the breathing of a man who'd hidden before. "No." Wilson's voice was firm. "Marcus wants the investigator lady to do her job first." "That wolf woman from Denver?" "Yeah. If Stone's guilty, let the law handle it proper this time." Wilson paused, and something shifted in his voice. "And if he's not? If he's not what?" The quiet extended until Eleanor could hear her own heartbeat. "Then we got ourselves a problem." Wilson's voice dropped lower. "Luke wasn't. He wasn't clean, Tom. We all knew it." "Don't say that." Tom's words came fast defensive. Marcus hired that investigator because he's not sure. You think he'd waste $500 otherwise?" Wilson mounted his horse again. "Luke Brenner wasn't no saint, and if Stone killed him in self-defense, then we've been hunting an innocent man." Tom swung into his saddle, clearly uncomfortable with this line of thinking. "What do? We do exactly what Marcus said. We watch. We wait. We let the truth come out." Wilson turned his horse toward the trail. "And we pray to God it's the truth we want to hear." The hoofbeats faded into the night. Eleanor didn't move until Ben's hand relaxed on her shoulder. Even then she waited until he stood before she dared to breathe normally. "They're not chasing us." Her voice shook slightly. "Worse." Ben stepped back toward the fire, his face grim in the orange light. "They're watching, waiting." "For what?" "For me to prove I'm a killer." He picked up a stick, stirred the embers. "Or prove I'm not." Eleanor moved to stand beside him. The fire cast shadows across his face, making the old scars stand out in sharp relief. "Which one are you?" He looked at her for a long moment. The question hung between them like smoke. "Don't know anymore." A sound in the darkness made them both freeze. Not horses this time. Something else. Something that moved through the undergrowth with a heavy, shambling gait. Ben grabbed Eleanor's arm. Back to the trees. Slowly. "What is it?" "Bear. Maybe mountain lion." His eyes never left the darkness beyond the firelight. "Either way, we don't want to be here when it arrives." They backed away from the camp, leaving the fire burning. Whatever was out there, it would find their scent soon enough. Better to be elsewhere when it did. As they moved deeper into the pine forest, Eleanor realized something that made her stomach clench with fear. They'd left everything behind. The carpet bag, the blanket, the last of their food. All they had now was each other and the long walk to morning. Dawn came cold and gray. Ben had led them in a wide circle through the trees, returning to the camp from the opposite direction. Whatever had been prowling in the night was gone now, but it had left tracks, massive paw prints in the soft earth near the creek. "Grizzly," Ben said quietly. "Young one, maybe 3 years old. Still dangerous." The carpet bag was intact, though the blanket had been dragged 20 feet and torn. Their small store of food was scattered some, eaten some just destroyed. The bear had knocked over stones from their fire ring as if annoyed by their presence. Eleanor salvaged what she could while Ben studied the tracks, reading them like text in a book. "It's gone north," he said finally. "Away from us. We should move anyway. Camp somewhere else tonight. We need water." Eleanor's throat was dry, her voice rough. Ben nodded toward the creek. "Fill the canteen. I'll gather wood. We need fire before we move." But first there was something else that needed doing. Ben sat on a flat rock near the creek, examining the shackle marks on his wrists. The metal had cut deep over 3 weeks of captivity. The wounds were angry red, some showing signs of infection. Without treatment, they could turn septic. Eleanor knelt before him with the canteen and a strip of cloth torn from her underskirt. She didn't ask permission this time, just took his hands in hers and began to clean the wounds. Up close, she could see the full history written on his skin. These weren't just the marks of recent imprisonment. Burns covered the backs of his hands, old scars from working metal. Calluses layered upon calluses thick as leather. The missing tip of his left pinky finger cut clean, long-healed. "You were a blacksmith." Not a question. A statement. Ben nodded once. "A good one, I'd wager." The faintest flicker of something pride maybe crossed his face. Eleanor worked in silence for a moment, wrapping the cloth around his right wrist. Then carefully, "What made you stop?" His jaw tightened. "Fire. Fire. House fire." The words came slow, forced. "Lost. Everything." Eleanor finished bandaging his left wrist, but didn't let go of his hand. "The house where your family lived." A nod, barely perceptible. "How did it start?" Ben pulled his hand away, not roughly but firmly. He stared at the creek, watching the water flow over smooth stones. When he spoke again, his voice was distant, as if he were describing something that happened to someone else. "Forge." Ben's voice was rough. "Behind house. Working." He stopped, swallowed. "Sarah. Birth. Too early." Eleanor's breath caught. She'd known his wife had died, but not the circumstances. "I heard screaming. Ran to the house. It was already burning. Roof walls. Everything." His hands clenched into fists. "I tried. God knows I tried. But the heat—" He stopped, unable to continue. "Sarah was inside. Her and the baby. Both gone before I could—" He shook his head. "The neighbors came, pulled me out, kept me from running back in. And Mary and Samuel, your other children." Ben's face transformed. The distant look vanished, replaced by something raw and broken. "They were at my brother's farm that night. A blessing, I thought. They were safe." "Were—" "Raiders came 6 months later. Cheyenne, some said. Outlaws, others claimed. Doesn't matter who they were. His voice had gone flat emotionless, the only way to speak of the unspeakable. They took Mary and Samuel, left me alive. I found their bodies a week later. Eleanor's hand went to her mouth. She'd known he'd lost children, but hearing the details made it real in a way that mere facts couldn't. After that, Ben continued, I tried to rebuild, started a new forge, new house. But the town, he paused. They said I was cursed, said death followed me. They were afraid. Of you, of what I represented. Grief, loss, things they didn't want to think about. He picked up a stone from the creek, turned it over in his palm. Luke Brenner led the mob. Came to my house with a rope, said they needed to drive out the evil. They tried to hang you. Sheriff Dawson cut me down at the last second, said it wasn't legal what they were doing, but the message was clear. Ben threw the stone into the creek. So I stopped talking, went up into the mountains, figured if I was going to be treated like an animal, might as well live like one. And Luke Brenner. Ben's eyes met hers, and for the first time since she'd met him, she saw something other than resignation in them. She saw anger. He came to my camp 3 weeks ago, drunk, angry, had the same rope they'd tried to hang me with before. Ben's voice was steady now, certain. Said I'd cursed the town, that his cattle were dying, his ranch failing, all because of me. What happened? He attacked. I defended. Ben stood turning away from her. He had a knife. I had an axe handle. We fought. He fell, hit his head on a rock. Then, he stopped. Then I tried to help him. Stupid, I know, but I couldn't just let him die. Ben's shoulders slumped. That's when the posse arrived, found me kneeling over him, blood on my hands. They saw what they expected to see, a monster over its kill. Eleanor stood as well, moving to face him. But it was self-defense. Doesn't matter what it was, only matters what they believed. He looked at her with something like wonder. Until you're the first person who asked instead of assumed. Why didn't you tell them? Tell the sheriff? Tell anyone? Would you have listened? Ben's laugh was bitter. I was the cursed mountain man, the beast who killed his own family. Words don't change what people want to believe. Eleanor thought about Ohio, about Daniel bleeding in the dirt while respectable men stood with smoking guns claiming self-defense, about how the law had sided with money and power over truth. I understand, she said quietly, and she did. They stood in silence for a moment, the creek singing its endless song between them. Then Ben returned to the scattered camp, his movements purposeful now. He gathered the torn blanket, tested its remaining strength, began to fashion it into a makeshift pack. We need to move, he said. Find the valley. Get settled before... He trailed off. Before Marcus sends more than deputies. Before winter comes. Ben glanced at the sky, reading clouds Eleanor couldn't interpret. Maybe a month before first snow, less if we're unlucky. How far to the valley? 2 days' walk, maybe 3. Eleanor looked at her worn boots, felt the blisters forming on her heels. 3 days seemed like an eternity, but she'd married a stranger to save his life. Walking 3 days seemed a small thing by comparison. Then we'd better start walking, she said. Ben looked at her with something that might have been respect. He shouldered the makeshift pack, tested its weight, then gestured toward the trail. They left the ruined camp behind, following the creek upstream into higher country. Neither of them looked back. The valley appeared just before sunset on the second day. Eleanor's feet were bleeding inside her boots. Every step sent fire up her legs. Ben had offered to carry her twice. She'd refused both times, stubbornness keeping her upright when her body wanted to quit. But when they crested the ridge and saw what lay below, her exhaustion vanished. The valley spread before them like a cupped hand, a mile wide, maybe 2 miles long, cradled between pine-covered slopes. A creek ran through the center, its water clear even from this distance. The grass was still green despite the late season, protected from early frost by the surrounding hills. And near the creek, barely visible through the trees, stood something that made Eleanor's heart sink. A structure. unfinished, abandoned, slowly being reclaimed by the wilderness. "That's it." Her voice came out flat, disappointed. "That's what Thomas Finch promised." Ben studied the valley with a craftsman's eye. Dugout shelter, half-built. Someone started, didn't finish. They descended into the valley as the sun touched the western peaks, painting everything in shades of gold and amber. Up close, the shelter looked even worse. 3 walls of stacked stone, a 4th wall of earth, where it had been dug into a hillside. A few roof beams in place, but most were missing or rotted. The door was just a gap in the stone. Inside, the dirt floor was scattered with debris, broken tools, scraps of wood, the remains of what might have been a table. And carved into one of the wooden roof beams, Eleanor found what she'd been dreading. 3 sets of initials, Ben said from behind her. 3 women. Eleanor nodded, unable to speak around the lump in her throat. A.M., she said finally. Ann Miller. She died of tuberculosis trying to get here, the boarding house owner told me. S.W. must be Susan Walsh. She disappeared after she found out about the scam. And you're number 4. Lucky me. Eleanor sank onto a flat stone, the reality of her situation crashing down. She'd sold everything, traveled 1,000 miles, married a stranger, all based on lies written in neat handwriting that promised safety, land, and a future. She'd been such a fool. Ben crouched in front of her, studying her face. Then he did something unexpected. He pulled the stick from his belt, the same one he'd used to draw plans in the dirt the night before, and began sketching in the packed earth of the floor. Lines appeared, straight, purposeful. A rectangle showing the existing walls. Then extensions, additions, a full roof, a chimney, a door frame. "What are you doing?" Eleanor asked. "Showing you what this could be." Ben added more details. Windows, a sleeping loft, a space for a stove. His hand moved with confidence, the hand of someone who'd built things before. "Good bones. Walls are solid. Roof needs work, but the beams that are here are sound." "With what?" Eleanor's voice cracked. "I have $23 and no tools. You have—" She stopped, realizing. He had nothing. Less than nothing. Ben set down the stick and wiggled his fingers in front of her face. Then he gestured to the valley around them, the trees, the stone, the creek. "You'd help me build—" The question came out smaller than she'd intended. A firm nod. "Why?" He thought for a moment, then pointed to himself and shook his head, then pointed to her and nodded. Finally, he pressed his palms together, the gesture he'd made at their wedding. "Partnership. Agreement. Because we're married now." Eleanor couldn't keep the bitterness out of her voice. "Because you owe me. Because—" Ben struggled with the words as if each one cost him something. Because building is better than dying. The truth of that statement settled between them. He could have let them hang him in Red Hollow. She could have stayed in Ohio and starved. Instead, they were here in this half-finished shelter with nothing but their hands and the wilderness. It was insane. It was impossible. It was all they had. "All right," Eleanor said. "We'll try." Ben's face transformed. Not quite a smile, she suspected he'd forgotten how to truly smile, but something close, something that looked almost like hope. He picked up the stick again and began adding more details to the drawing. A garden space near the creek, a path to the water, even a small corral for animals they didn't yet own. Eleanor watched him work, and despite everything, the exhaustion, the fear, the overwhelming impossibility of what they were attempting, she felt something shift inside her chest. Maybe it was hope, or maybe it was just the last ember of defiance refusing to be extinguished. Either way, she'd take it. The sun dipped below the western ridge and the valley filled with shadow. Ben stood, dusted off his hands, and began gathering deadfall wood for a fire. Eleanor found a reasonably clean spot in the corner of the shelter and spread out their torn blanket. That night they ate the last of their salvaged food, a few strips of dried beef, some wild berries Ben had found along the trail. The fire burned small but steady, and for the first time since leaving Red Hollow, Eleanor felt almost safe. Almost. Ben sat near the entrance, keeping watch. Not because he expected danger, Eleanor realized, but because keeping watch was how he'd survived. Vigilance had become as natural to him as breathing. She lay down on the blanket, her body aching in places she'd never known could ache. Outside, the valley was alive with sound crickets, night birds, something large moving through the brush at the forest edge. Ben. He turned his head slightly, acknowledging without speaking. The house that burned. The one where Sarah died. Did you build it yourself? A pause, then a single nod. And you were going to build another before the town, before they tried to hang you. Another nod. Eleanor pulled the blanket tighter around her shoulders. Then you can build this. I believe that. She heard him shift position, saw his silhouette against the dying firelight. When he spoke, his voice was so quiet she almost missed it. Thank you. 2 words, but they carried the weight of everything unsaid between them. Eleanor closed her eyes, and despite lying on dirt, despite the uncertain future, despite everything, she slept. She didn't see Ben stay awake all night staring out at the valley. Didn't see the way his hands trembled when he looked at the half-built walls, remembering the last time he'd tried to build a home and how it had ended in ashes and death. But she also didn't see the way his jaw set with determination as the stars wheeled overhead. He would build again, and this time he would not fail. Morning arrived with surprising gentleness. No bear, no raiders, no catastrophe. Just weak sunlight filtering through gaps in the pine canopy and the musical sound of the creek running over stone. Eleanor woke to find Ben already working. He'd cleared debris from one corner of the shelter, stacking broken boards in a neat pile, usable versus firewood. His movements were methodical, careful, as if each piece of wood required consideration. You should have woken me, she said, sitting up. Every muscle protested. Ben glanced over his shoulder. You needed sleep. 3 words. He was speaking more, Eleanor realized, still hesitant, still choosing each word with care, but the wall of silence was developing cracks. She stood wincing at the pain in her feet. Her boots sat near the door and she dreaded putting them on again. But Ben had anticipated this too. Next to her boots sat a neat pile of soft bark strips, the kind he'd used before to cushion her feet. Thank you. He nodded, returning to his sorting. Eleanor wrapped her feet, pulled on the boots, and joined him at the pile of wood. What can I do? He pointed to a stack of reasonably straight branches. Good for roof beams. Take 2. He gestured toward the far wall where several existing beams still held firm. She began hauling branches, testing each one for rot before adding it to the collection. It was simple work, mindless work, and her thoughts drifted. 3 days ago, she'd been in Red Hollow, penniless and alone. 2 days ago, she'd married a man in a cage. 1 day ago, she'd been running through the forest hunted, and now she was building a house with a stranger who was legally her husband. Her life had become surreal. By midday, they'd cleared the interior of the shelter and sorted everything salvageable. Ben had also discovered something interesting. Underneath the collapsed section of roof protected from weather was a small cache of tools, old, rusted, but tools nonetheless. A hammer, a saw with broken teeth, several handfuls of bent nails that could be straightened, and, miracle of miracles, a small bag of lime mortar somehow still dry. Finch must have left these, Eleanor said, examining the tools, before he abandoned his promises and moved on to the next victim. Ben was already testing the saw, drawing it across a piece of wood. The teeth caught and skipped, but it cut. With work, it could be made functional again. He looked up, caught Eleanor watching him, and something in his expression shifted. The concentration faded, replaced by a shadow of fear. His hands, which had been steady on the saw, began to tremble. Eleanor recognized the look. She'd seen it the night he smashed his chains, the moment before all that rage and grief had erupted. Ben, what's wrong? He set the saw down carefully, as if it might bite him. Then he stood and walked to the entrance, staring out at the valley. His right hand lifted to his throat, an unconscious gesture touching the place where a rope had once tightened. Eleanor followed him outside. The day was clear, beautiful. The creek sparkled in the sunlight. Birds sang in the pines. But Ben wasn't seeing any of it. His hand moved again this time, drawing a line across his throat. Then he pointed to himself and covered his face with both hands. Understanding crashed over Eleanor. "You built before, and it ended in death." A barely perceptible nod. "Your family died in the house you built." Another nod. His jaw clenched so tight she could see the muscles jumping. She moved to stand beside him, close but not touching. "And you're afraid it will happen again? That if you build here, death will follow?" He turned to look at her, and the raw pain in his eyes nearly broke her. This wasn't just grief. It was guilt. The guilt of the survivor, the builder, the man who'd hammered every nail in the house where his wife burned alive. "It doesn't have to be the same," Eleanor said softly. Ben pulled a stick from his belt. He seemed to always have one now, and began drawing in the dirt outside the shelter. A rectangle appeared, then 3 small circles inside it carefully placed. A family, Sarah, Mary, Samuel. Then he drew a 4th circle separate from the others. Alone, himself. Violent slashes cut through all 4 circles. Then his palm came down hard, erasing everything. The message was clear. Everyone he built for died. Everyone he loved was taken. Eleanor crouched beside the erased drawing. She picked up the stick, and before Ben could stop her, she began her own sketch. 2 circles, side by side, herself and Ben. "We're different," she said. "Different people, different time, different place." She drew a simple structure around the 2 circles. Not elaborate, just 4 walls and a roof. "This doesn't have to be a tomb. It can be a home." Ben stared at the drawing for a long moment. Then slowly he took the stick from her hand, added details to the simple house, a chimney, a door, windows. And around the house he drew trees, animals, the creek, life not death. When he looked at her again, the fear was still there. But so was something else, the same fragile hope she'd seen the night before. "You'll help me?" Eleanor asked, though she already knew the answer. Ben nodded. Then he picked up the rusted saw, tested its weight in his hands, and returned to the shelter. Eleanor followed, her heart lighter than it had been in weeks. They worked until the sun touched the western ridge. Ben showed her how to test wood for soundness. Tap it, listen for the hollow sound of rot. How to split straight branches for roof beams using a wedge and stone hammer. How to judge the angle of a roof to shed snow and rain. He taught through demonstration, rarely speaking, but his patience was infinite. When Eleanor made mistakes, and she made many, he simply showed her again different angles until she understood. By evening, they had a collection of usable materials and the beginnings of a plan. That night, as they sat by the fire, Eleanor noticed Ben wasn't keeping watch at the entrance. He'd settled closer to the fire, close enough that the blanket they shared brushed against his arm. Progress, she thought. Measured in inches, but progress nonetheless. She began to hum quietly, a habit from childhood, something she did when her hands were busy or her mind was at ease. Ben's head turned sharply. Eleanor stopped. "I'm sorry, I didn't mean to—" He shook his head, made a gesture. "Continue." "You want me to keep humming?" A nod. So she did. Nothing particular, just a melody her mother used to sing. Simple, repetitive, soothing. Ben's shoulders gradually lowered. The permanent tension that seemed carved into his spine eased just slightly. When Eleanor glanced at him from the corner of her eye, she could have sworn she saw something like peace cross his features. Music, she realized. When had he last heard music? Up in the mountains alone, there would have been nothing but wind and animal cries. In the cage, only jeers and threats. She kept humming, adding her own variations to the melody until the fire burned low and sleep pulled at her eyelids. "Eleanor." She opened her eyes. Ben was still sitting upright, but his face was turned toward her. "Thank you," he said, "for the music." "You're welcome." A pause. Then, "Sarah used to sing. Before—" He didn't finish. Didn't need to. "I'll sing for you any time you want," Eleanor said. "Consider it part of our marriage contract. I provide terrible singing. You provide building expertise." The corner of his mouth twitched. Not quite a smile, but close. "Not terrible," he said softly. "Good." Eleanor felt warmth spread through her chest that had nothing to do with the fire. "Sleep, Ben. Tomorrow we have work to do." "Tomorrow we build," he agreed. And for the first time since his wife died, Ben Stone slept without nightmares. 4 days later, a visitor arrived. Eleanor heard the wagon before she saw it, the distinctive creak of wood and leather, the plodding rhythm of tired horses. She was at the creek washing clothes, her skirt hiked up and her hands red from cold water. Ben was on the roof of the shelter testing the placement of new beams. He'd found his rhythm over the past days, working with steady focus from dawn until dark. The shelter was taking shape, still rough, still incomplete, but unmistakably becoming a home. At the sound of the wagon he froze. His hand moved to his belt where he'd taken to keeping a hammer. Not a weapon exactly, but it could serve. Eleanor stood, water dripping from the cloth in her hands, and watched as an old wagon emerged from the tree line. The driver was an ancient man, his face weathered like boot leather, his beard more gray than white. The wagon behind him sagged under the weight of goods, pots, pans, bolts of cloth, mysterious bundles wrapped in canvas. A peddler, a traveling merchant making his rounds through the territory. The old man pulled his horses to a stop 30 feet from the shelter. His eyes took in everything, the half-built structure, the woman by the creek, the man on the roof with a hammer in his hand. "Afternoon," he called out. His voice was surprisingly strong for someone his age. "Didn't mean to startle you folks." Ben climbed down from the roof, slowly keeping himself between the peddler and Eleanor. The old man saw the movement and chuckled. "Easy there, son. I'm just a peddler. Name's William Hutchins. Folks call me Old Hutch." He gestured to his wagon. "Been making this circuit 30 years. Saw your smoke yesterday, thought I'd stop by. See if you folks needed anything." Eleanor moved closer, her natural wariness warring with curiosity. A peddler meant news goods contact with the outside world. It also meant risk. Word could spread about where they were. "We don't have much money," she said carefully. Old Hutch waved a dismissive hand. "Money ain't the only currency in these parts, ma'am. I deal in trade too. And—" He squinted at something on his wagon. "Looks like I might have a problem you folks could help with." He climbed down, moving stiffly, and walked around to examine his rear wheel. Even from a distance, Eleanor could see the problem. One of the iron bands that held the wheel together had cracked, and the wood beneath was beginning to split. "This wheel won't make it another 10 miles, Old Hutch said. "Been meaning to fix it for weeks, but—" He looked at Ben, really looked at him. "You're a smithy, aren't you? Can tell by the hands." Ben said nothing, but his eyes flicked to the damaged wheel, assessing. "If you could fix it," Old Hutch continued, "I'd make it worth your while. Got goods on this wagon, tools, food, cloth. You folks look like you could use all three." Eleanor saw Ben's hesitation. He'd been trying to avoid notice to stay hidden, but this was an opportunity, and Old Hutch seemed harmless enough. She made the decision for both of them. "He'll fix it, but we'll need to see what you're offering in trade first." Old Hutch grinned, showing gaps where teeth should have been. "Fair enough. Let me show you what I got." The next hour was a revelation. Old Hutch's wagon was like a general store on wheels. He had tools, real tools, not the rusted remnants they'd found in the shelter. Nails, rope, a proper saw, cooking pots, flour, salt, sugar, coffee, dried beans. Even a small mirror that made Eleanor catch her breath when she saw her own reflection for the first time in weeks. "How much for the tools?" Eleanor asked, calculating rapidly. With the materials here, they could finish the shelter in half the time. For all of it, $20. $20. Nearly everything they had. Eleanor opened her mouth to negotiate, but Ben spoke first. "Fix the wheel, then we talk price." Old Hutch's eyebrows rose. "You speak heard tell in Red Hollow there was a mountain man who'd gone mute. Guess that was exaggeration." The mention of Red Hollow made both Eleanor and Ben stiffen. Old Hutch saw it immediately. He held up his hands. "None of my business. I don't carry tales and I don't judge. You folks are making a home here doing honest work. That's all I need to know." Ben studied the old man for a long moment, then nodded. Wheel first." He walked to the wagon, circled it once, then knelt to examine the damage more closely. His fingers traced the crack in the iron band, tested the wood beneath. Eleanor could see him thinking, calculating, planning. Iron? Heat. Reshape. He gestured the process. New rivets. Ben looked up. Don't have a forge. Can you make one temporary like? Ben thought, then nodded. Will take time. I got time. And I got something else. Old Hutch climbed into his wagon, rummaged around, and emerged with a broad grin. These. He was leading a mule. The animal was old, probably 15 years if it was a day. Its coat was patchy, one ear had a notch missing, and it walked with a slight limp on its left front leg. But its eyes were clear and its breathing steady. She's stubborn as sin, Old Hutch said, slow as molasses, but she'll haul a plow or a wagon or just about anything else you ask. Can't keep her myself, too many animals already, but if you folks can use her. Eleanor looked at Ben. A mule meant they could haul stone from the hillside, logs from the forest, water from the creek in greater quantities. A mule changed everything. What do you want for her? Eleanor asked, almost afraid of the answer. Old Hutch scratched his beard. Fix my wheel, good and proper, and the mule's yours. Eleanor studied the old mule patchy coat, notched ear stubborn set to her jaw. We'll call you Constance, she said, for your constant refusal to hurry. The mule snorted as if in agreement. It was too generous. There had to be a catch. Why? Ben asked, voicing the question Eleanor was thinking. The old man's face grew serious. Because 30 years ago I was right where you two are now. New territory, no money, no friends, just me and my Rachel trying to carve out a life. He patted the mule's neck. Some folks helped us. Never forgot it. Figure it's my turn to pass it on. Eleanor felt her throat tighten. We accept. Thank you. Don't thank me yet. She bites sometimes, and she's got opinions about which way to go. Stubborn beast. Old Hutch handed the lead rope to Eleanor. But she's loyal. Once she decides you're her people, she'll work till she drops. Ben was already gathering stones to build a temporary forge. Eleanor watched him work, saw the way his hands moved with confidence when they had a purpose. This was what he'd been made for, solving problems, building things, fixing what was broken. By late afternoon, Ben had constructed a crude but functional forge from creek stones and clay. Old Hutch provided charcoal from his wagon. Eleanor pumped the makeshift bellows, a piece of leather and a hollow log, while Ben heated the cracked iron band. The work was hot, sweaty, and required precision. But Ben never hesitated. His hammer rang against the anvil, a flat stone that served the purpose with steady rhythm. Sparks flew. The iron glowed orange, then white-hot, then cooled to black as Ben shaped it. When he finally removed the wheel and fitted the repaired band, the crack was gone. The wheel was stronger than it had been before the damage. Old Hutch examined the work with an expert eye, rolling the wheel, testing its balance. Then he nodded, satisfied. You've got skill, son. Real skill. He looked at Ben with new respect. If you were in a town, you'd have customers lining up. Folks always need good smithy work. No customers. Ben's jaw tightened. Want alone. Fair enough. Old Hutch remounted his wagon, now repaired and sound. But word of advice, world won't leave you alone forever. Might as well be on good terms with it when it comes calling. Before he left, he unloaded several items from the wagon, the tools he'd shown Eleanor earlier, 2 sacks of flour, salt, sugar, coffee, and a sturdy cooking pot. But we didn't pay. Eleanor started. Wheel repair was payment enough. These here are gifts. Old Hutch tipped his hat. You folks take care. And if you need anything, I come through this way every 6 weeks. Spring through fall anyway. Winter I'm down in Denver. He clicked his tongue and the horses started moving. The wagon creaked back toward the trail. Just before he disappeared into the trees, he turned and called back. Oh, one more thing. There's been talk in Red Hollow. Marcus Brenner hired himself an investigator, woman from Denver name of Catherine Wolfe. She's asking questions about what happened with his brother. Eleanor felt ice slide down her spine. Thought you should know, Old Hutch said. She's supposed to be good, real good. Finds the truth, they say, whether folks want her to or not." Then he was gone, leaving only dust and the echo of his words. Ben stood very still, the hammer still in his hand. "An investigator," Eleanor said. "That could be good, if she finds the truth. Truth doesn't always set you free." Ben's voice was bitter. "Sometimes it just gives people better reasons to hate you." That night they took inventory of Old Hutch's gifts. The tools alone were worth more than the $30 Eleanor had left Ohio with. The food would last them weeks, maybe months, if they were careful. And the mule, stubborn, half-lame, and already trying to bite Ben when he got too close, represented a kind of wealth neither of them had dared hope for. But the news about Catherine Wolfe sat between them like a third presence. "What will we do?" Eleanor asked. "If she comes here?" Ben was quiet for a long time. Finally, "Tell the truth. It's all we have. And if the truth isn't enough, then we run." He looked at her seriously. "I won't let them cage me again. And I won't let them hurt you." The determination in his voice should have frightened Eleanor. Instead, it made her feel safer than she had in months. "We'll face it together," she said, "whatever comes." Ben nodded. Then he did something unexpected. He reached across the space between them and took her hand. Not a brush of fingers like that first night on the trail. A real grip, firm and warm. "Together," he agreed. They sat in silence, hands joined, while the fire burned down to embers and the valley settled into night around them. Tomorrow they would finish the roof. Tomorrow they would start thinking about winter preparations. Tomorrow they would worry about investigators and the past catching up. But tonight they had each other, a mule that bit and a shelter that was slowly becoming a home. For now, that was enough. Benjamin shifted in his chair, the firelight catching the silver in his hair. The grandchildren waited, breath held. "That mule," he said with the ghost of a smile, "lived another 12 years, stubborn to the end." "What happened to Old Hutch?" Michael asked. "Died peacefully in Denver, 1895. We went to his funeral. He'd helped dozens of families the way he helped us." Benjamin's voice grew soft. Some kindnesses echo through generations. Grace leaned forward. "But Grandpa, the investigator, was coming. What happened when she arrived?" Eleanor spoke then, her voice still clear despite her years. "That's when your grandfather proved that truth can set you free. But first we had to face it." Benjamin nodded. Winter came, and with it the hardest test of all. He looked back into the fire, and once more the story pulled them backward through time. In the cabin, Benjamin paused. The fire had burned lower. He reached for another log, placed it carefully on the embers. "That was just the beginning," he said to his grandchildren. "The building, the waiting, but life has a way of testing what you build." Grace leaned forward. "What happened next, Grandpa?" "Winter came, and with it, a child." Benjamin's hand found Eleanor's. "Your father." Samuel Jr. shifted in his chair, a knowing look on his face. "But before that," Benjamin continued, "we had to prove we deserved what we'd built. To others, to ourselves." He looked back into the flames, and the story pulled them forward again. Back to 1872. Back to the valley. Back to when everything hung in the balance. 8 months had passed since Old Hutch's visit. Winter had come to the valley, not the crushing, deadly cold that Ben had warned about, but a gentler season. Snow fell in soft curtains, transforming the landscape into something almost magical. The shelter, no longer a ruin, but a proper cabin, stood warm and solid against the elements. Eleanor stood at the window, an actual window now, with real glass that Ben had traded work for in Cedar Falls, and watched the snow accumulate on the pine branches. Inside, the fire burned steady in the stone hearth Ben had built. The mule, who Eleanor had named Constance for her stubborn refusal to do anything, quickly stood in a lean-to shelter attached to the cabin's north wall. Ben was in town. It was Tuesday, one of his 3 days each week, working at Perry's General Store. He'd been gone since dawn, and Eleanor expected him back before dark. He always came back before dark. She touched her stomach absently, a gesture that had become habit over the past weeks. No visible changes yet, but she knew. She'd known for almost a month now, had been waiting for the right moment to tell Ben. But when was the right moment to tell a man who'd lost 2 children that he was about to become a father again? A sound outside made her turn. Not Ben too early for him to return. She moved to the door, opened it carefully. A woman stood in the clearing dismounting from a sturdy bay horse. She was perhaps 40, dressed in practical traveling clothes, split skirt for riding, heavy coat, wide-brimmed hat dusted with snow. Her face was weathered but intelligent, her eyes the kind that missed nothing. "Mrs. Stone," the woman called out. Eleanor's hand tightened on the doorframe. She recognized the voice from Old Hutch's description, though she'd never heard it before. "Catherine Wolfe," the woman introduced herself, confirming Eleanor's fear. "I'm investigating the death of Luke Brenner. I'd like to ask you some questions." For a moment, Eleanor considered lying, saying Ben wasn't here, that they'd moved on, that Catherine had the wrong cabin. But the investigator's eyes were already cataloging everything: the fresh smoke from the chimney, the obviously inhabited space, the mule in the lean-to. "My husband isn't here," Eleanor said instead. "He's in Cedar Falls." "I know. I waited until he left." Catherine tied her horse to the hitching post Ben had built. "I wanted to speak with you first. May I come in? It's cold." Every instinct told Eleanor to refuse, but she'd learned something in 3 months of frontier life: information was currency, and sometimes you had to spend some to gain more. "Come in," she said, stepping aside. Catherine entered, removed her hat, and took in the cabin with an investigator's eye. The orderly interior, the hand-built furniture, the garden tools waiting for spring near the door, the small shelf of books, 3 volumes that had been in Eleanor's carpetbag, treated like treasures. "You've made a real home here," Catherine said. It wasn't quite a compliment, more an observation. "We've tried." Eleanor gestured to the table. "Please sit. I can make coffee." "Thank you." While Eleanor prepared the coffee, real coffee, a luxury from Old Hutch's last visit, Catherine settled at the table and withdrew a leather notebook from her coat. "How long have you known your husband, Mrs. Stone?" Eleanor measured grounds into the pot. "Not long. We met in September." "In Red Hollow?" "Yes." "Where he was imprisoned?" "Where he was caged without trial," Eleanor corrected. "There's a difference." Catherine's pen scratched across paper. "You married him the same day you arrived in town. That's unusual." "Unusual circumstances." Eleanor poured water into the pot, set it on the stove. "I had nowhere to go. He was going to hang for something I didn't believe he did. It seemed like a solution." "A solution, not love." Eleanor turned to face the investigator directly. "Miss Wolfe, I married a stranger to save his life. What we feel for each other now is between us." "Fair enough." Catherine flipped a page. "Did he tell you what happened with Luke Brenner?" "He told me Luke came to his camp drunk with a rope, threatening to finish what he'd started years ago." "Which was?" "Hanging him. Luke led a mob that tried to lynch Ben after his family died. The sheriff cut him down at the last moment." Catherine's pen paused. "That's not in the official reports." "I imagine there's a lot not in the official reports." The coffee began to boil. Eleanor poured 2 cups, brought them to the table, and sat across from Catherine. The investigator took a sip, nodded appreciation, then leaned back in her chair. "Mrs. Stone, I've spent 10 weeks investigating Luke Brenner's death. I've interviewed 12 people. I've examined the scene. I've reviewed medical reports." She paused. "And I've discovered that Luke Brenner was not a good man." Eleanor's hands tightened around her cup. "He assaulted at least 3 women that I can prove. Paid them off to keep quiet. He cheated business partners, intimidated witnesses, and used his brother's money and influence to avoid consequences." Catherine's voice was level professional. "The night he died, he was drunk. He went to your husband's camp armed with a knife and rope. There were signs of a struggle. Luke's blood alcohol was estimated at twice what would make a man dangerously impaired." "So it was self-defense?" "Yes." Catherine closed her notebook. "Your husband defended himself against a violent drunken man who came to kill him. Any court should see that clearly." Eleanor felt something unclench in her chest. The problem is proof, no witnesses, only your husband's word against a dead man's reputation. And in this territory, reputation often matters more than truth. Then why are you here? Catherine met her eyes directly. Because Marcus Brenner hired me to find the truth, not to confirm his assumptions. The truth. She took another sip of coffee. And the truth is that his brother was a violent criminal who got himself killed attacking an innocent man. You'll testify to that? If needed, yes. Eleanor wanted to cry with relief. Instead, she asked, "Does Marcus know? I told him yesterday." Catherine's expression softened slightly. He didn't take it well. Finding out your brother was a monster is hard, but he's a good man, Marcus, better than his brother ever was. He'll do the right thing. A sound outside hoofbeats, but familiar ones. Ben was returning early. Catherine stood. I should go. I've said what I came to say. Wait. Eleanor moved to the door. Stay. Meet him. He should hear this from you directly. The investigator considered, then nodded. All right. Ben appeared in the doorway moments later, snow dusting his shoulders. His eyes went immediately to Catherine, and his whole body tensed. It's all right, Eleanor said quickly. This is Catherine Wolfe, the investigator Marcus hired. Ben's hand moved toward his hammer, still his constant companion, but he didn't draw it. Catherine stayed seated, non-threatening. Mr. Stone, I won't keep you long. I just wanted you to know that I've completed my investigation into Luke Brenner's death. Ben said nothing, but his eyes never left her face. Based on physical evidence, witness testimony about Luke's character and habits and the circumstances of that night, I've concluded that you acted in self-defense. Luke Brenner came to your camp intending to kill you. You defended yourself. That's all. The silence stretched. Eleanor could see Ben processing this, looking for the trap. Why? He asked finally. Why what? Why tell us you could have just told Marcus? Filed your report? Catherine smiled faintly. Because you've been living for 3 months not knowing if a hangman's noose was coming for you. I thought you deserved to know you're free. Free? Ben said the word like he was testing it, seeing if it fit. Legally, yes. Marcus has agreed not to pursue any charges. The territorial attorney has reviewed my findings and concurs. As far as the law is concerned, you're an innocent man. Ben sank into a chair as if his legs would no longer support him. Eleanor moved to his side, put her hand on his shoulder. There's one more thing, Catherine said. She pulled out a folded document from her coat. Marcus wanted me to give you this. Ben took it with trembling hands, unfolded it, read silently. What is it? Eleanor asked. A deed. Ben's voice was rough. To the land. This valley. Marcus bought it from the territorial office. Transferred it to us. Catherine stood preparing to leave. He said it was an apology. For his brother. For the pain Luke caused. For not seeing the truth sooner. She moved to the door, then paused. One more thing, Mr. Stone. I spoke with Sheriff Dawson in Red Hollow. He wanted you to know that he's resigned his position. Said he couldn't enforce laws he didn't believe in anymore. He's planning to move to Denver soon to work with prison reform advocates. Ben looked up. He quit because of what happened to you. What almost happened. Catherine put on her hat. People change, Mr. Stone, sometimes for the better. She opened the door, then turned back one last time. Build your life here. You've earned it. Then she was gone, her horse's hoofbeats fading into the snow. Ben and Eleanor sat in silence for a long time, the deed spread on the table between them. We own the land, Eleanor said finally. We're really safe. Ben didn't answer. He was staring at his hands, the hands that had killed a man in self-defense, that had built this cabin, that were finally free from the shadow of the gallows. Ben. Eleanor knelt beside his chair. Are you all right? He looked at her, and she saw tears tracking down his face. I thought I'd die with that guilt, die believing I was a murderer. You're not. You never were. He pulled her into an embrace, sudden and fierce. Eleanor held him while he wept. not the silent, controlled tears she'd seen before, but great wrenching sobs that shook his whole body. Years of fear and guilt and shame pouring out all at once. When he finally pulled away, his eyes were red, but clearer than she'd ever seen them. "I have something to tell you," Eleanor said. "The moment wasn't perfect, but it was real, and that was better. I'm pregnant." Ben's face went through a series of transformations: shock, fear, hope, joy, settling finally on something that looked like wonder. "You're sure?" "I've known for a month. I was waiting for the right time, but I don't think there is a right time for news like this." His hand moved to her stomach, hovering just above it. "May I?" "Of course." He pressed his palm gently against her, and Eleanor covered his hand with hers. "I'm terrified," he admitted. "Sarah died. The baby died. I can't—" "I'm not Sarah. This isn't then. We're different." Eleanor squeezed his hand. "And you're not alone this time. We'll face it together." "Together," he repeated, as if the word was a promise. They stayed like that for a long time, kneeling on the cabin floor, hands joined over the life growing between them, while snow fell softly outside and the fire burned warm within. For the first time in years, Benjamin Stone allowed himself to hope. Spring came late to the valley, but when it arrived, it brought change. The snow melted in rushing streams, feeding the creek until it roared. The grass greened almost overnight. Wildflowers appeared in carpets of color: purple lupine, yellow glacier lilies, white avalanche lilies that covered the hillsides. And with spring came visitors. The first was Marcus Brenner himself. Eleanor spotted him riding up the valley trail one morning in early April. She was in the garden, newly expanded and planted with seeds old Hutch had brought, and her pregnancy was now visible, a gentle swell beneath her work dress. She stood, one hand on her lower back, and watched Marcus approach. Ben emerged from the cabin, hammer in hand, his face unreadable. Marcus dismounted 50 feet away. He was thinner than Eleanor remembered, his face drawn with lines that hadn't been there 3 months ago. He held up both hands, showing he was unarmed. "I come in peace," he said, "and I come to apologize." Ben said nothing. Marcus took a few steps closer. "Catherine told me everything, about what Luke did, what he was." His voice cracked slightly. "I spent 3 months wanting revenge for a man who didn't deserve it, hunting an innocent man because I couldn't accept that my brother was—" He stopped, unable to finish. "A monster," Ben supplied quietly. "Yes." Marcus looked at the ground. "I'm sorry, for what he did to you, for what I almost did, for being blind to the truth." Eleanor watched Ben carefully. His jaw was tight, his knuckles white on the hammer handle. This man had hired deputies to hunt them, had wanted Ben dead, had made the last 3 months a living fear. But he'd also hired Catherine to find the truth. And when he learned it, he'd done the right thing. "Apology accepted," Ben said finally. "But it doesn't make us friends." "I know." Marcus pulled an envelope from his coat. "This is the deed to your land. It's legally yours now. No one can take it from you." He set it on a fence post and backed away. "There's something else." Marcus's voice was rough. "Luke had a son, 8 years old. Name's Daniel. His mother died last year. The boy's been in an orphanage in Denver." Eleanor's breath caught. "I'm adopting him," Marcus continued. "I'm going to raise him right, the way Luke should have been raised. Teach him that violence doesn't solve anything, that being a Brenner doesn't mean being a bully." He looked at Ben. "I can't undo what my brother did, but I can try to make sure his son becomes a better man." Ben studied Marcus for a long moment. Then he reached into his pocket and pulled out something small, the carved wooden horse that Marcus had given him months ago during their confrontation in Cedar Falls. He held it out. "For the boy, when he's old enough to understand." Marcus took it, his hands shaking. "You're giving this back." "No, I'm passing it forward. Tell him it's from a man who lost children. Tell him to honor their memory by being kind." Marcus nodded, unable to speak. He mounted his horse, then paused. "I heard about your wife. Congratulations." "Thank you." If you need anything, anything at all, you know where to find me." Then he rode away, leaving the deed on the fence post and the weight of the past a little lighter on all of them. Eleanor came to stand beside Ben. That was generous, giving him the horse. It was holding me to the past. He needs it more than I do. Ben put his arm around her shoulders. We're building a future now. No room for anchors. That night, Ben showed Eleanor something he'd been working on in secret. A cradle carved from cedar wood smooth as silk. The sides were decorated with horses the same pattern as the toy he'd given Marcus, the same toys his daughter Mary had loved. "For our baby," he said. "I know it's early, but I needed to make it. Needed to believe this time will be different." Eleanor ran her fingers over the carvings, touched by the hope and fear evident in every careful cut. "It's beautiful. I want to name him Samuel if it's a boy. After—" He didn't need to finish. "And if it's a girl, Grace. Sarah's middle name." Eleanor smiled. "Samuel or Grace Stone? I like both." Word of Catherine Wolfe's investigation spread faster than wildfire. By May, when Eleanor was 5 months pregnant and beginning to feel the baby move, people from Cedar Falls started visiting. Not to gawk or judge, but to help. Mr. Perry came with tools and an offer. "We need a proper smithy in town. If you're willing to come in 3 days a week, I can provide space and materials. You keep 70% of the profits." Ben accepted. Mrs. Perry came with her sister, both experienced midwives. "When your time comes, we'll be here. Don't you worry." Dr. Samuel Green rode out from Cedar Falls, examined Eleanor, and pronounced both mother and baby healthy. "You're strong, Mrs. Stone. Stronger than you know. You'll do fine." Even old Hutch appeared, his wagon loaded with supplies. "Heard you folks are expecting. Brought some things might help." Baby clothes, soft blankets, a rocking chair that had belonged to his late wife Rachel. "She'd want it to go to a baby who's wanted and loved," he said gruffly. The community that had once feared Ben was slowly embracing him, but not everyone was happy about it. In late May, 3 men arrived in the valley. They wore expensive suits, carried official-looking papers, and had the air of men used to getting their way. Eleanor was hanging laundry when they rode up. Ben was at the forge. He'd built a proper one now, complete with chimney and bellows shaping iron for a commission from a rancher in Cedar Falls. "Mrs. Stone," the tallest man dismounted. "I'm Robert Carver. These are my associates, Mr. Walsh and Mr. Dennison. We're here representing the Colorado Land Development Company." Eleanor's stomach sank. "What can I do for you?" Carver pulled out a document. "We've filed a claim on this land, legal and proper. You and your husband will need to vacate within 30 days. He smiled coldly. "Interesting coincidence, we purchased the original claim from Thomas Finch's estate after he died in Denver last month. Seems he kept records of all his ventures." Eleanor's blood ran cold. The man who'd lied to her was dead, and somehow, even in death, he was still taking from her. "When did he die?" Eleanor heard herself ask. "February," Carver said with false sympathy. "Consumption, they said. Died alone in a boarding house." A part of Eleanor had imagined confronting Finch someday, demanding answers. Now that chance was gone forever, replaced by this lawyers and papers and one final theft from beyond the grave. Ben appeared from the forge, his face streaked with soot. "We have a deed." "A deed from Marcus Brenner, yes. But Mr. Brenner didn't own this land. He purchased it under false pretenses from a claim that was never properly finalized. Our claim predates his by 7 years. Eleanor felt the world tilt. "You're lying. We have documents from the territorial office, signed and sealed." Carver's smile was cold. "You're squatters, Mrs. Stone, and squatters have no rights." Ben stepped forward, and for a moment Eleanor saw the man he'd been accused of being dangerous, barely controlled. "Get off our land." "Or what?" Walsh, the shorter of the three, put his hand on his gun. "You'll kill us like you killed Luke Brenner." "That was self-defense," Eleanor said quickly. The investigation proved nothing except that Marcus Brenner was soft." Carver rolled up his documents. "You have 30 days. After that we'll return with the sheriff and have you removed by force." They mounted their horses and rode away, leaving Eleanor and Ben standing in the yard they'd worked so hard to build. "They can't do this," Eleanor said, but her voice shook. "Can they?" Ben's face was grim. "With enough money and the right lawyers, they can do anything." That night Ben rode to Cedar Falls and didn't return until dawn. When he did, his eyes were red from lack of sleep and his jaw was set with determination. "I talked to everyone I could. Perry Green, even Marcus." He sat heavily at the table. "The claim is real. Filed in 1865 by a company that went bankrupt in 1867. The territorial office assumed the land was abandoned. When Marcus bought it last year, he didn't realize there was a prior claim. So we lose everything. Not if we fight." Ben pulled out papers of his own, old, yellowed, but still legible. "I have proof I lived here in 1865. Before their claim was filed, this land was mine first." Eleanor stared at the documents. A receipt for supplies dated April 1865. A letter addressed to Benjamin Stone at this location. An old survey map with his name marked on it. "Why didn't you show these before?" "Didn't think they mattered. Didn't think I'd ever need to prove I had a right to exist." Ben's voice was bitter. "But if they want a legal fight, I'll give them one." Over the next 2 weeks they prepared. Ben worked his forge during the day, building goodwill and earning money for legal fees. At night they gathered evidence, the improvements to the land, the cabin, the forge, the garden. Everything that proved their claim was based on labor, not just paper. Marcus Brenner contributed his own documentation, including the investigator's report and his purchase records. Dr. Green prepared a medical affidavit about Eleanor's pregnancy and the risks of forced relocation. Mr. Perry gathered testimonials from 24 Cedar Falls residents about Ben's character and work, and Catherine Wolfe, hearing about the case, volunteered to testify as an expert witness. The hearing was scheduled for June 15th at the Territorial Courthouse in Cedar Falls. Judge Howard Blackwell, circuit judge, known for fairness, would preside. Eleanor was nearly 8 months pregnant by then, her belly swollen, and the baby active. Every movement reminded her of what was at stake. If they lost the land, where would they go? How would they start over with a newborn? The night before the hearing she couldn't sleep. Ben sat with her, holding her hand. "What if we lose?" she whispered. "Then we find another valley, build another home." He squeezed her fingers. "We've done it once. We can do it again." "I don't want to do it again. I want to stay here. This is our home." "I know." Ben pulled her close. "So tomorrow I'll tell the truth, all of it, and we'll see if truth is enough." The morning of the hearing, half of Cedar Falls turned out to watch. The makeshift courtroom, the saloon tables pushed aside to make room for benches, was packed. Carver and his lawyers sat at one table, confident and well-dressed. Ben and Eleanor sat at the other, flanked by Marcus and Catherine Wolfe. Judge Blackwell entered at exactly 9 o'clock. He was a severe man in his 60s with steel-gray hair and eyes that seemed to see everything. "This court is now in session. Case of Colorado Land Development Company versus Benjamin and Eleanor Stone regarding title to land in the mountain valley locally known as Stone Valley." Carver's lawyer, a slick man named Thornton, presented their case first. Original claim documents from 1865, surveys, legal precedents. Everything was proper, official, stamped with territorial seals. "The defendants are squatters," Thornton concluded. "Whatever improvements they've made are irrelevant. The law is clear. Prior claim takes precedence." Then it was their turn. Marcus testified, first explaining his purchase and why he'd transferred the deed to Ben. Catherine Wolfe followed, detailing her investigation and vouching for Ben's character. Dr. Green spoke about Eleanor's pregnancy and the medical risks of forced relocation. A dozen Cedar Falls residents testified to Ben's work, his honesty, his contributions to the community. But Thornton objected to each one. "Character witnesses are irrelevant, Your Honor. This is a question of legal title, not personal virtue." Judge Blackwell nodded. "He's right. Unless you have evidence that directly addresses the question of claim precedence, I'll have to rule for the plaintiff." Eleanor's heart sank. Then Ben stood. "Your Honor, I have something to say." Thornton jumped up. "The defendant has no legal standing to—" "Let him speak," Judge Blackwell interrupted. "I want to hear this." Ben walked to the front of the room. Every eye was on him. Eleanor saw his hands trembling, saw him touch his throat, that old gesture remembering the rope. Then he began. "Your Honor, I'm not good with words. Never have been." His voice was rough but steady. "For a long time I didn't speak at all. Couldn't. The world had taken everything from me, and silence was all I had left." He pulled out the yellowed documents. "But I lived on that land before these men ever filed their claim. April 1865. I built a house there, brought my wife Sarah. We were going to raise a family. Then the house burned. Sarah died. So did our unborn child. 6 months later, raiders took my other 2 children. Mary was 6. Samuel was 4. The courtroom was utterly silent. The town blamed me, said I was cursed. They tried to hang me for bringing death to their community. Sheriff cut me down, but the message was clear. So I left, went up into the mountains, stopped talking, figured if I was going to be treated like an animal, might as well live like one." He looked at Eleanor. "Then this woman came to Red Hollow, found me in a cage, asked me to marry her. Strangest proposal I ever heard." A few people chuckled. The tension broke slightly. "She didn't know me, didn't know if I was guilty or innocent. But she gave me a chance when no one else would. And we went to that valley, the same valley where I'd lost everything. And we built." His voice strengthened. "Every stone we placed, every beam we raised, every nail we drove. We bled for that land. We fought winter for it. We turned a ruin into a home." He turned to Carver. "You never set foot there, never saw it, never knew it existed until someone told you it might be valuable." Back to the judge. "Your Honor, I'm not a lawyer. I don't know all the legal words, but I know this paper says they own it. But we live there. We built there. We're raising a child there." He paused, gathering himself for what came next. "I lost my voice once, because I was afraid to speak, afraid to hope, afraid to fight for what mattered." His hands stopped trembling. "I won't lose it again because I'm angry. And I won't lose my home because someone filed papers." He pulled out his old documents, spread them on the judge's bench. "This proves I was there first, before their claim, before their company. This land was mine by right of settlement, by right of labor, by right of everything except their paper." His final words rang through the courtroom. "I've earned this, with my hands, with my work, with my life, and I'm begging for what's right." He sat down. The silence was absolute. Judge Blackwell examined the documents carefully. Minutes passed like hours. Finally he looked up. "Mr. Thornton, do you dispute the authenticity of these documents?" We'd need time to verify. They're dated April 1865. Your claim is dated July 1865. If authentic, Mr. Stone's settlement predates your filing. But, Your Honor, the claim was properly filed through legal channels, while Mr. Stone was living on the land, improving it, making it productive." Blackwell's voice was sharp. "The Homestead Act of 1862 grants rights to settlers who improve land. Mr. Stone's evidence of prior settlement combined with his current improvements presents a compelling case." He paused, looking at Ben. "Tell me, Mr. Stone, if I rule against you, what will you do?" Ben stood again. "Start over. Find another valley. Build another home." He glanced at Eleanor. "We've done it before. We can do it again. But I'd rather not. I'm tired of running, tired of losing things I've built." Judge Blackwell nodded slowly. Then he brought down his gavel. "I find for the defendants. Benjamin and Eleanor Stone have demonstrated both prior settlement and continuous improvement of the land in question. The claim by Colorado Land Development Company, while properly filed, is superseded by Mr. Stone's prior residence and current homestead." The courtroom erupted. Cheers, applause, a few angry shouts from Carver's side. The judge's gavel rang again. "Furthermore, I'm declaring this land a registered homestead under Mr. Stone's name. No future claims can challenge that title without demonstrating fraud which I see no evidence of." Carver and his lawyers stood furious. "We'll appeal to the territorial court." "You can try," Blackwell said mildly. "But I doubt they'll overturn this ruling. The law is clear. Labor rights deeds. Mr. Stone has written his in sweat and sacrifice." Eleanor couldn't breathe. They'd won. Actually won. Ben sat down heavily as if his legs would no longer support him. People crowded around Marcus, shaking his hand, Catherine offering congratulations, Dr. Green clapping his shoulder. Sheriff Dawson. No former. Sheriff Dawson pushed through the crowd. He extended his hand to Ben. "I was wrong about you. Dead wrong. And I'm sorry." Ben looked at the offered hand for a long moment. Then he shook it. "You cut the rope when it mattered. That's enough." Dawson nodded, his eyes bright. "I'm working with prison reform now in Denver, trying to make sure what happened to you doesn't happen to others." "Good." Outside, Eleanor's knees gave way. Ben caught her, held her up. "We won," she whispered. "We actually won." "You won," he corrected. "You believed when I couldn't. You stood when I wanted to run. This is your victory." "Ours," she insisted. "Everything we do is ours now." Outside the courthouse, Constance the mule stood tied to a hitching post, ears flicking patiently, as if she'd known all along they would win. The baby chose that moment to kick hard enough that Ben felt it through Eleanor's dress. His face transformed wonder, replacing the last shadows of fear. "Did you feel that?" "I did. Strong." Ben said, his hand spread across her belly. "Like the mother." Eleanor laughed through tears. "And stubborn like the father." They stood in the courthouse yard surrounded by well-wishers, their hands joined over their growing child, and for the first time in longer than either could remember, the future looked bright. The letter arrived 3 weeks later. Eleanor was resting. Dr. Green had insisted she limit her activity as the pregnancy advanced when Ben brought it inside. The handwriting was rough but legible, the paper good quality. "It's from Marcus," Ben said, opening it carefully. Eleanor sat up. "What does it say?" Ben read aloud. "Dear Benjamin and Eleanor, I hope this letter finds you well, and that Eleanor's pregnancy is progressing smoothly. I wanted you to know that Daniel is home with me now. The adoption was finalized last week. He's a good boy, though, haunted by the loss of his mother and confused about his father's legacy. I've been teaching him about horses, about the ranch, about what it means to be a man of honor rather than violence. It's slow work, but I see progress. There's something else. When I told Daniel about his father, not the sanitized version, but the truth about Luke's violence and drinking, he asked me a question that shook me. If my father was bad, does that mean I'll be bad too?" I didn't know how to answer. But then I remembered what you said, Ben, about the carved horse, about honoring memory through kindness. So I gave him the horse you carved, told him it was from a man who lost children, who knew what grief and loss felt like, who chose to build instead of destroy. Daniel keeps it with him always, sleeps with it under his pillow, says it reminds him that he can choose what kind of man to be. I wanted to thank you for that gift. You gave him hope at a time when he desperately needed it. If you ever need anything at all, you have only to ask. The Brenner name owes you a debt we can never fully repay, but we'll spend the rest of our lives trying. Your friend Marcus Brenner. P.S. Daniel asked if he could meet you someday. When Eleanor has recovered from childbirth and things have settled, perhaps you might visit the ranch. I think it would mean a great deal to him to meet the man who carved his horse. Ben set the letter down carefully. His eyes were wet. "He called himself my friend," he said wonderingly. "He is," Eleanor replied. "People can change. You've changed. I've changed. Why not him?" Ben refolded the letter, tucked it carefully into the drawer where they kept important documents. "Maybe when the baby is old enough to travel, we'll visit. Let Samuel or Grace meet Daniel." "I'd like that." The baby kicked again, and Eleanor winced. These kicks were getting stronger, more insistent. Dr. Green had said that was normal, a sign of a healthy, vigorous child. But Eleanor was exhausted. 7 months pregnant in a frontier valley, even with a solid cabin and good food, was grueling. She woke every few hours to use the chamber pot. Her back ached constantly. Her feet had swollen so much she could barely fit into her shoes, and she'd never been happier. Ben had become almost obsessively protective. He'd cut his days at the forge from 3 to 2, spending more time at home, making sure Eleanor had everything she needed. He'd built a comfortable chair with cushions, arranged the cabin so she wouldn't have to reach or bend unnecessarily, even started teaching himself to cook with mixed results. "You'll wear yourself out," Eleanor told him after he'd rebuilt the chicken coop for the 3rd time, convinced the first 2 versions weren't secure enough. "Can't have anything happening to you, to the baby." His voice was tight with old fear. "Nothing will happen. Women have babies every day." "Sarah." "I'm not Sarah." Eleanor took his hands, made him look at her. "I'm healthy. Dr. Green says so. Mrs. Perry says so. The baby is strong. We're going to be fine." "You can't know that." "No, but I can believe it, and so can you." She pressed his palm to her belly. "Feel that? That's our child, fighting to be born. We have to fight just as hard to believe everything will be all right." Ben closed his eyes, feeling the movements beneath his hand. "I'm trying." "I know." Eleanor kissed his forehead. "Keep trying. That's all either of us can do." Labor began on a Tuesday night in late June. Eleanor woke at midnight with a cramping sensation low in her belly. At first, she thought it was false labor. She'd had several episodes over the past weeks, but this felt different, stronger, more purposeful. She timed the contractions quietly for an hour, not wanting to wake Ben until she was sure. When they started coming every 10 minutes, regular as clockwork, she knew. Ben. He was awake instantly, years of vigilance making him a light sleeper. "What's wrong?" "Nothing's wrong, but I think the baby is coming." She'd never seen him move so fast. He was dressed and out the door in seconds, heading for the Perry house in Cedar Falls to fetch Mrs. Perry and Dr. Green. Eleanor used the time alone to prepare. She changed into a clean nightgown, laid out towels and blankets, lit extra candles, moved to the rocking chair Old Hutch had given them, and tried to breathe through the contractions. They were getting stronger, faster. Mrs. Perry arrived first, her sister Martha in tow. They'd ridden through the night, their horses tied next to Constance, who greeted them with her usual stubborn snort. Both women had delivered dozens of babies and moved with calm efficiency. "How far apart?" Mrs. Perry asked, feeling Eleanor's belly. 5 minutes now." "Good. You're progressing nicely." She examined Eleanor with gentle hands. "Still early, though. Could be hours yet." Dr. Green arrived an hour later. He confirmed Mrs. Perry's assessment and set up his medical bag in the corner just in case. Ben hovered anxiously, unable to help, unable to leave. "Mr. Stone," Mrs. Perry said kindly, "why don't you wait outside? This isn't a job for men." "I'm staying." Ben's voice left no room for argument. Mrs. Perry looked at Eleanor, who nodded. "He stays." The hours blurred together. Contractions came faster, harder. Eleanor walked when she could, rocked when she couldn't breathe through the pain. Ben stayed at her side, offering water, holding her hand, whispering encouragement. "You're strong," he kept saying. "You can do this." "Damn right I can." Eleanor gasped between contractions. Then to Mrs. Perry, "How much longer?" "Hard to say. First babies take their time." Another contraction hit worse than before. Eleanor cried out, couldn't help it. Ben's face went white. "Is she supposed to be in this much pain?" "Perfectly normal," Dr. Green assured him. "Childbirth isn't easy, but Mrs. Stone is doing wonderfully." Dawn came. The contractions were constant now, barely any break between them. Eleanor was exhausted, soaked with sweat, every muscle trembling. "I can't," she gasped. "I can't do this anymore." "Yes, you can." Ben's voice was firm. "You married a stranger in a cage. You walked 3 days on bleeding feet. You built a home from ruins. You faced down land thieves in court. You can do this." "I hate you right now." Eleanor panted. "I know. Hate me later. Push now." Mrs. Perry laughed despite the tension. "He's right, dear. Next contraction you push." Eleanor pushed and pushed and pushed. "I see the head," Martha called out. "Almost there." One more push, this one pulling a scream from Eleanor's throat, and then a different cry, high, angry, alive. "It's a boy," Dr. Green announced. "A healthy boy." He cleaned the baby quickly, checked him over, then wrapped him in a soft blanket and placed him in Eleanor's arms. Eleanor stared down at the tiny, red-faced creature. Her son. Their son. "Hello," she whispered. "Hello, Samuel." Ben knelt beside the bed, his face wet with tears. He reached out with one trembling finger to touch the baby's hand. Samuel's tiny fingers wrapped around it, gripping tight. "He's perfect," Ben breathed. "He's so perfect." 10 fingers, 10 toes, healthy lungs, Dr. Green confirmed. "Congratulations, both of you." Mrs. Perry finished cleaning up, made sure Eleanor was comfortable, then tactfully suggested everyone give the new family some privacy. When they were alone, Ben carefully took his son into his arms. Samuel was still crying, his little face scrunched up in outrage at being born. "Shh," Ben murmured. "You're safe. You're loved. You're home." The baby quieted at the sound of his father's voice. "He knows you," Eleanor said softly. "I talked to him every night, told him stories, told him he was wanted." Ben's voice cracked. "Told him I wouldn't fail him like I failed the others." "You didn't fail them. Life failed them. And you didn't fail Samuel." Eleanor reached up to touch Ben's face. "You gave him a home, a mother who loves him, a father who will protect him. That's not failure. That's everything." Ben sat on the edge of the bed, cradling Samuel in one arm while holding Eleanor's hand with the other. "Thank you," he said, "for asking me." Eleanor smiled, recognizing the echo of words from their first night together. "For answering." They sat in the morning light, 3 people who'd been strangers a year ago now, bound together by love and blood and the simple choice to keep trying when everything seemed lost. Outside, the valley was coming alive with birdsong. Inside, a new life was beginning. And for Benjamin Stone, who'd once believed he was cursed to lose everything he loved, this felt like the greatest miracle of all. Benjamin Stone, 81 years old, stopped speaking. The fire had burned down to embers while he'd been telling his story. His grandchildren sat transfixed, hardly daring to breathe. Grace, 16, had tears streaming down her face. "That's the most beautiful thing I've ever heard, Grandfather." "It's true," Eleanor said from her chair beside Ben. She was 74 now, her hair white, but her eyes still sharp. "Every word." Michael, 12, looked confused. "But Grandfather, what happened to Marcus and Daniel and Sheriff Dawson?" Benjamin smiled. "Marcus raised Daniel to be a good man. Better than his father ever was. Daniel became a doctor in Denver, saves lives instead of taking them. He still visits," Eleanor added, "every Christmas, brings his own children to meet their honorary grandparents." "And Sheriff Dawson?" Grace asked. "Spent 20 years fighting for prison reform, changed laws, saved lives, died last year at 73. We went to his funeral." Ben's voice was soft. "He spent the rest of his life making up for one mistake. That's all any of us can do." Samuel Jr., 43 years old and sitting with his own children, spoke for the first time. "I always wondered why you named me after a child who died." "Because memory honors," Ben said. "Your name carries their memory forward, makes sure they're not forgotten. And you," he looked at his son with pride, "you've made that name mean something new. Something good." Grace stood moved to sit at her grandfather's feet like she had as a small child. "Grandfather, what did you learn from all of this?" Benjamin thought for a long moment. Then he stood slowly, his joints protesting, and walked to the window. The valley spread below, covered in snow, the lights of several cabins visible now, where once there'd been only wilderness. "I learned that cages aren't made of iron. They're made of fear, of giving up. of letting the past define the future. He turned to face his grandchildren, and I learned that freedom isn't escape, it's choice. The choice to speak when silence is easier, the choice to build when destruction seems certain, the choice to love when loss seems inevitable. His eyes found Eleanor's, and 46 years fell away. He saw her as she'd been 28 desperate braves standing before a cage and offering her hand to a stranger. And I learned that sometimes the craziest thing you can do, his voice grew gentle, is exactly the thing that saves you. Grace wiped her eyes. I want to be that brave someday. You will be, Eleanor said. When your moment comes, you'll be ready. How do you know? Because you're a stone, and stones don't give up. We build. The children left as the snow grew heavier, bundled in coats and scarves full of stories they'd carry into their own futures. When Benjamin and Eleanor were alone, they sat together by the fire, hands joined as they'd been that first night so many years ago. Do you think they understood? Eleanor asked. Maybe not now, but someday when they need it, they will. We built a good life, didn't we? Benjamin looked around the cabin, larger now, expanded over the years, full of the evidence of a life well lived. Photographs of children and grandchildren, tools he still used. The carved cradle that had held 3 generations of babies. We built the best life, he said. From nothing, from less than nothing. We built a life worth living. Eleanor leaned her head on his shoulder. I'd do it again, you know. If I could go back to Red Hollow knowing everything that would happen, I'd still walk up to that cage, still make that crazy proposal. Why? Because you were worth saving, and the life we built was worth fighting for. She squeezed his hand. And because some things are worth doing even when they seem impossible. They sat in comfortable silence, watching the fire die down, listening to the wind outside. Finally, Benjamin spoke one more time. Thank you for asking me. Eleanor smiled, completing their ritual. For answering. Outside, snow fell softly over Stone Valley, covering everything in white. The cabin stood warm and solid, a testament to what 2 people could build when they refused to give up. And inside, 2 people who'd saved each other sat hand in hand, their story, complete their legacy, secure in the hearts of those who would remember. The iron cage was long gone, melted down years ago. But the iron vows remained unbroken, eternal. And in the morning the valley would wake to new snow, new light, and new possibilities, just as it had every morning for 46 years. Some things, Benjamin thought as sleep finally claimed him, were built to last. Not because they were strong. The snow had stopped. Dawn broke clear and cold over Stone Valley. In the cabin, Eleanor sat alone by Benjamin's bedside. He'd passed in the night peacefully, his hand in hers, until the very end. She didn't weep. Not yet. Instead, she walked to the window and looked out at the valley they'd built together. 48 years since she'd proposed to a stranger in a cage. 48 years of building, fighting, loving, enduring. On the mantel, 3 carved animals caught the morning light. Horse, bear, rabbit. Memories made tangible. Eleanor picked up the horse, ran her fingers over the worn wood. Thank you, she whispered, for answering. Outside, the valley began to wake. Smoke from neighboring cabins, their children's homes, now rose into the clear air. The forge that Samuel Jr. operated. The garden that Grace tended, the life they'd built spreading beyond them. Eleanor smiled through her tears. They'd been strangers once, bound by desperation and the thinnest thread of hope. But they'd built something that lasted, not because it was strong, because it was loved. Benjamin Stone passed away peacefully in his sleep on March 3, 1919, at age 82. Eleanor held his hand until the end. Eleanor Hartwell Stone followed on March 15, 1922, at age 78. She is buried beside her husband in Stone Valley. They had 4 children: Samuel, 1873 to 1951, Margaret, 1875 to 1960, Grace, 1878 to 1965, and Thomas, 1880 to 1958. The Stone family forge operated in Cedar Falls until 1955. Daniel Brenner became one of Denver's leading physicians, pioneering trauma surgery techniques. He credited Benjamin Stone with teaching him that violence ends where healing begins. Marcus Brenner donated land and money to establish an orphanage in Denver that served hundreds of children. It operated until 1945. Catherine Wolfe became the first female U.S. Marshal in Colorado Territory in 1885. She died in 1917 at age 57, having solved over 200 cases. Former Sheriff Cole Dawson helped establish Colorado's first prison reform program. He died in 1917 at age 73, widely respected for his advocacy work. Stone Valley is now a Colorado state park. The original cabin still stands preserved as a historic site. Over 50,000 people visit each year. A plaque near the cabin reads, "Here in 1872, Benjamin and Eleanor Stone built a home from ruins, a family from strangers, and a legacy from love." Their story reminds us that the strongest foundations are built not on certainty, but on the courage to try when all seems lost.